So, welcome to another episode of the OoruLab podcast from Bengaluru. Ever complain how bad our cities are, how bad your commute is? You'll get to hear from people who are working to solve these problems in their own way. This is your weekly soapbox for urban sustainability. I am Satya Sankaran. Urban dwellers broadly struggle with depleting service levels in public infrastructure. Citizens are at their wits' end trying to get their public officials to fix their problems. Are we barking against the right tree when we ask for civic problems to be sorted out? Some have even gone to the courts with public interest litigation to help get simple things like footpaths fixed and obstructions cleared. Let's ask our guest today, Suryaprakash. He is the program director at Daksh, which works on legal reforms. He has more than 2 decades of experience in law. He was also the co host of the Talaharate podcast in Canada. Welcome to the show, Surya.
Thank you, Satya, so much for having me on the show. It kind of gives me pleasant memories of the Talarate podcast, which we hosted for quite some time. ಅಂದ್ರೆ ನೀವು ಹೋಸ್ಟಾ ನಾನ್ ಹೋಸ್ಟಾ ಅಂತ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ
Confusion.
ಪೂರ್ವಾಶ್ರಮದ ವಾಸನೆ ಇನ್ನ ಸ್ಟಿಲ್ ನಾಟ್ ವೆರಿ ಕ್ಲಿಯರ್. So happy that we are discussing this important topic and very close to your heart, having seen your work, fantastic work you've been doing for the last few years.
So let's dig in. So where are we supposed to complain when we have, like the civic issues, right? We are at our wits' end trying to ask officials to fix it. There are lots of apathy that we feel, even though they are wanting to do, they are unable to do for various reasons. What recourses as citizens do we have to get remedies for the deficiencies in public infrastructure, the thing that the government builds for us in the cities?
Yeah, and it's such an important question, and I don't think enough has been talked about these, if I may call it, the grievance redressal for citizens as
Hmm.
citizens. There are, of course, subject or grievance type variations. If a footpath is broken versus no water supply, electricity supply versus garbage, there are very context specific responses that are required by a citizen. But to draw from those specific instances, the first action should be with the executive. The citizens should always ask that the executive be more responsive to their needs, because two things: they are the closest to the ground. Your PWSSB office, water supply office, is in the range of is just around 2-3 kilometers somewhere. Right? Usually, it's that's the range. So they are close to the situation, as an example. And more importantly, they are in the legal structure, in the governance and institutional framework structure. They are supposed to be doing this first level, ticket, the lowest level of ticket response. Now, this does not mean that this is the only level of recourse, and we kind of always talk about the executive and the judiciary, and we will come to the judiciary in just a bit, as being one institution, but they're actually multi-layered to it. There is a assistant executive engineer, there's a chief engineer, and then you'll have a chairman, then you'll have in parallel, you will have your ward committee and the corporator and the MLA, you'll have the minister, then you will have the CM, right? So of course, the citizen wants quick solutions. That's all he cares about. As somebody who wants solutions, effective solutions, not just patchwork, what the next step should be is very, very dependent on where you are located, not just geographically, as a city, as a person. I think, and this is an answer considering or assuming that the citizen is acting in good faith. I mean, no other situation we want to even contemplate in this conversation. So somebody possibly who has a connect to a minister, probably just call him and say, "Yen really a road ali hangide." Right? It may lead to action. What's wrong in it? Somebody who can walk up to a AE's office and say, "Ali road repairing ಮಾಡಬೇಕು sir." So I think what recourse can be taken is very, very dependent on where you are. There is no one answer, which includes how the judiciary can also be used for this purpose. When I say used, can be taken as a resort, a legal resort to, without being any abusive process. Again, the judiciary is not one monolith. You have a district courts, you have your high court. sometimes even Supreme Court, right? For example, the fact that there have been no elections in Bangalore had to go to the Supreme Court, and they had to give directions, which has not been followed. So, so again, very have to be very mindful of where we are at, because our courts and our institutions are located in a larger political system and a legal institutional hierarchy. I think this would possibly lay out the outline of what we can develop over the course of this conversation.
Sure. So let's talk about the executive, which by which you mean the officials and the bureaucrats who have been elected to the civic bodies that actually deliver your services, like the city corporation, the water supply board, the electricity company, and these kind of things, right? Now, most of these people end up having some kind of a grievance redressal platform of sort. Nowadays, it's the age of the app. Everybody is building an app for everything,
Yeah,
and it seems to be a black hole which goes into, I mean, it may get addressed, it may not get addressed. We don't know if people are just the executive is just collecting all of the troubles together to fix it at one
correct.
shot. And what we feel is, I gave you a trouble, you need to fix it, versus their whole tendering process, that they use to collect all the problems into. Where do you see this particular executives responsiveness going at the first cut? Because that's where we anyway go. But if the ball drops there, what happens? What are the complexities there you see?
Which is very common. So it's not just an imaginative scenario. So let's assume that there is a complaint, or you're bringing to the notice of authorities. Again, we need to, in India, we kind of conflate these two, but it is very important that we distinguish between the executive, the bureaucrats, and the elected executives, although they are political in nature. And this may vary. I mean, in the rural, we are talking about urban areas, so it's
Urban
different.
areas.
But in rural, the panchayats
Yeah.
could well be both, right? So not always, but more or less, you could say that they have a larger control over, and which is the conversation which is now developing. Are really, cities on par with? It seems that the rural bodies have more power than urban bodies. Anyway,
Mm.
different question. So when there is a lack of response, or a
Mm.
ineffective response by the bureaucrats, depending on the nature of the problem, there is either an escalation that you should do within the executive on the gravity of the problem, and possibly also explore the judicial route. The reason why I say this is, if there is, for example, again, the problems could be at various stages, right? Either you could
Mm.
have a footpath that is broken,
Mm.
you could have a road that is very poor,
Mm.
or you have a repair that is not going on in the way you think it should be going, right? It's not proceeding the way it should. It's either slow. The e.g. for a flyover, it started but is not going anywhere. So you have either a current situation, or you have a future situation which is, you think it is heading that, it's like you can see it's going to crash very soon, or it's even earlier, when there's a design, the steel flyover, right? When there is even a thought of the tunnels that are being talked about, how should we think about them now? In cases where the grievance is at the stage of conceptualization, very often there is no executive jurisdiction at all. You can't go to anybody for an idea that is still being discussed, right? So then you have to engage at the highest political levels, or sometimes even judicially. Who are the people who are drawing up these designs, right? Are they mandated? Are they legally allowed to, right? So these are questions that should be asked. For example, when the designer, when the flyover is being designed, or the tunnels are being talked about, why isn't the Bangalore Metropolitan Action Force, or the
The
that body not
BMLTA.
involved,
Yeah.
right?
Mm.
Or the BMLTA, so, or the department. So are the right people in the room when these are even being discussed officially? That could be suitable for a PIL or a judicial recourse. But if it is at a stage of, this is broken down, can you repair it? It may be that the judiciary will be while it may signal and make some noises, the real action is with the executive. It is often said that the judiciary is very powerful, but in carrying out its orders, in executing its orders, it has to depend on the executive.
Mhm.
So there is no money that the judiciary itself has. It is relying on somebody else's money. So imagine them following through, etc. So we have to be mindful of these institutional limitations when we approach them for relief, for effective sustainable relief, if I may add that. If you really want to just make a point, then it's okay. But if you want what you want to happen
Mhm.
and be continuing to happen over a period of time, then you must think through about what you want, what you're asking, whom are you asking, what the solution,
Mhm.
the relief you're asking. Should it be with the High Court? Should it be with the Supreme Court? Of course, you can't straight away jump to the Supreme Court. But are you going to the Consumer Forum? Are you going to the District Court first? Questions to be asked. For example, when there is a poor road, and you know. Yeah, we don't have to talk much about it. We know it so well. It's a lived experience. And there is a person who is injured by way of a accident that is caused by a poor road. We've seen it. Right? Very, very, it hits you really hard. They approach courts, and the courts don't give relief and say, this is really, really shocking that, again, which court? The district courts don't give relief. They will say, we don't have a jurisdiction. This is actually, if at all, this is actual tort, right? Somebody who
Mhm.
is suffering from the effect of somebody else not doing something. If this is not in your jurisdiction, then you have a lot to answer for, right? This is where, to understand what relief to ask whom at what point of time, is it's important to remember contextually where these institutions are or at what point of time. If the same case had been filed in the early 80s, or maybe even late 80s or early 90s, you may have found them to be much more willing to hear you out, because at that point of time they were responding to a political and bureaucratic system that was not much looked up to in by the by the society. So the
Mhm.
judiciary had to step in. And then I think post liberalization, or maybe after 94, 95, you have seen the system change, that these executive and the politicians are much more hands on. They want this to be seen to be responsive, if not actually responsive. So the possibly the judiciary took a back seat. So if you file the same case for a poor roads by way of a PIL in the
Mhm.
Dharwad bench, the response you will get will be very different from poor roads in Bangalore, in the Bangalore bench of the Karnataka High Court.
Why?
Dharwad is not possibly seen to be as important for the state as Bangalore is, right? This is a conjecture, just to drive home the point that there could be variations in institutional responses depending on the location of the problem and who is being asked to do what. If I could just zoom out a bit from here, it would be that all institutional responses should be seen to be part of a larger complex system. Ultimately, each institution is a complex system by itself, which is
Mhm.
responding to the pushes and pulls of systems around it. You could say each of them are subsystems of a larger system, which is possibly the nation, but you could expand it beyond. There is a fantastic statement by one of the complex systems thinker. Ultimately, there's only one system, the universe.
Yeah.
Everything else is just a subsystem. So I mean, we don't want to get so metaphysical,
Philosophical.
philosophical, but just to, for our immediate conversation, it's better to remember that how institutions respond and how you should engage with it is very context specific, which does not mean, and if I could just take a couple of minutes more, which does not mean that are that you always need to be pragmatic. There is scope for being idealistic. There is scope for being principled. There is scope for being votaries for accountability and transparency, all of those you have space for. But you have to do it very consciously. Like everything else in life, you have to be aware of who you are and where you are before you take any action, which does not take away your agency or your options, but you just have to be very mindful of going out in a town hall and not and putting up placards to say improve roads, may not improve roads, but it is very important, right? It is a part of who you are. Maybe there are 15 people like you who want to tell the world that this is important for us. It is an extremely important point. So there is a space for people who want to do that, and there is a space for people who want to engage on the constructive side of engaging with policymakers, engaging with the executive judiciary, engaging with judicial reliefs. So again, the question seemed to be, what can a citizen do? But I think we have now arrived at where we're saying there could be different types of citizens, and your responses could be very different based on where you are at.
One of the questions that arises is, how do I know where I'm at? Right? How do I determine how the court where I live respond? How do I find that out? Is there something that I can see? Are there precedents that we can use? Or how do we learn? Because we have, when I look at, I was a part of a PAL. Let's jump into the judiciary before we get into the political side of things. Uh, the There are the personal damages that we are seeking remedies for. I fell down, I broke my leg, I need compensation because it was poorly done, whatever it was, right? I was walking, I was cycling around, the grating was in parallel instead of perpendicular. I have seen in the PIL, the court generally, even though they want to give us a remedy, they basically side with the executive, not necessarily claiming act of God till the push comes to a shove, but they
Mhm.
basically say, can you go and do, we are trying our best, we'll give them a chance, improve footpaths in the next 5 years. It doesn't happen. Another PIL. Okay, I've even had cases where in the PL that I was a part of, we had said there was an obstruction, the footpath was clearly broken, and there were scooters standing on the footpath. And the next time they had the next hearing, they came back, removed the scooters, and said, we have cleared it, but the footpath was still broken. So it's hearing to hearing, we are jumping
Yeah.
into different pieces of this puzzle, and the responses have been quite, I should say, siding with the judiciary, siding with the executive, kind of a thing. So there are two parts to this, right? There's a public interest litigation, which is a group of people coming together and saying, can you do better footpaths? Can you do better bicycle lanes or whatever? Versus personal injury, which needs compensation. So this brings to the question you mentioned about tort. What is tort? How does India compare vis-a-vis some other countries? I've heard of remedies in the US where somebody spilled hot coffee on their lap,
Yeah, famous.
and they get millions of dollars. Why are some countries different? Is the law itself different? What are we doing differently?
Okay, to answer that first, I think the law is the same. I mean, there are two laws, right? One is the statute, and then there
Hmm.
is the judicial precedents which create the law, common law, right?
Hmm.
Where India is lacking, because we're part of the larger British inherited laws, there are British precedents that could be relied upon to give relief where it can be provided if the courts want to. What is lacking is that will to take it forward,
Hmm.
and this is possibly where, and we could have a debate around that, is the judges realization that there is a Lakshman Rekha that they should not cross. Yeah, Lakshman Rekha is not, I mean, all of that, but there is a line they should not cross, and the realization that bureaucrats are also operating within their limitations. There are political limitations, right? Who are the contractors through whom the bureaucrats get the work done? How are the contractors selected? Right? Where is the corruption angle of those contractors and the politicians being together? So it's possibly, and that is a larger socio-political development that will have to take time. Possibly it is the judge's realization that has to play out on its own. One way to look at it would be, unless there is a provocation, unless there is a nudge or a poke, that's changed. I mean, from in my mind, a complex is like an amoeba, right? Shapeless, always responding to change around it. Unless somebody pokes it, it will sit where it is. It's a stable equilibrium, right? Unless somebody pokes it, it will not shift its shape. And that poking is possible through judiciary. Of course, it is possible through the society, but because of the diffused nature of socio-economic, social engagement with the larger system, it's become so much more difficult. With the judiciary, it is possible for them to push hard, poke, and say, no, do it differently, right? That has not happened. That's the answer to your second question. The sorry, I forgot the first part. Was that a question or was that a kind of
It
an
was more
observation?
like understanding why they side with the executive, and of course you answered why they side with the executive, because they just want to poke. But let's ask that first question differently again. You talked about the line that they draw. In general, we have the constitution, which is the law, and then there is the common law, which evolves by
Through
reading
judgments.
precedents and making judgments based on. So if I didn't get a remedy here, somebody else must have given a remedy in some other court, and we can use that and say, hey, there's the precedent. There, the footpath that said this, so why don't you do that?
Right.
Is that feasible? Is that how these things, explain a bit with that on the judicial overreach. Why is
So
there a line? What is the overreach that people talk about?
So this line is of it's not without its dispute or controversies. Many people I have spoken to on the executive side feel that the courts frequently cross the line in matters that they should not be crossing the line. Many people on the civil society feel that the judges are not doing enough to push the bureaucrats. So it's not a one answer. It will. I mean, there are. I mean, the 80s, 90s, the PILs. If you see, there is a judge who goes on a morning walk, comes back, and takes a suo moto PIL and says, in the interest of the public, this slum should be cleared. Those kinds of things have happened. So I wouldn't blanketly say the judiciary does not cross the line, but generally, when we come to granting relief to citizens for damage, and I was responding to that
Mhm.
particular point, that they have not, because it's money, and they know ultimately when a relief has to be granted, monetary relief, it has to come out of somebody's pocket,
Mm.
and that has been difficult. It's a bell, a cat to bell. Is it the individual bureaucrat who has done something wrong? He has done it on the orders of his secretary. Should you ask the secretary to pay it? The secretary is possibly responding to a situation where the politician has asked him to onboard a contractor, right? So whom should you? So that is the what I would say is a bit of ambiguity. Of course, the courts have pushed back in other matters. For example, staffing, promotion, diversity. They have pushed very hard the bureaucracy, because we are talking about the public services and public infrastructure that citizens expect from the urban bodies, the governments. In that case, it has not been poor. It has not. It has not been great. There are exceptions. Again, we should never take it. For example, if you recall, there was this whole series of cases, or rather, a case that continued for a long time on removing transformers from footpaths,
Mm.
which has actually ultimately resulted in KEB making all transformers on a pole on top. It doesn't come in the way of the footpath. It happened, or already have happened, because of the change of technology and the modernization of KEB, or did the courts comments and the directions accelerated? Each situation is a case study by itself.
That kind of brings me to the question of the role of politicians in this, because there are constraints imposed by the complex system that you talk about, where contracting is, what can I say, captured by certain political interest in many cases, right?
Mm.
And hence the executive is kind of caught between the devil and the deep sea, where he has to deliver, and at the same time he is not in control of some of these things where he's being
Yeah.
pushed. These kind of things, definitely I'm sure that the judiciary takes note of this, but I don't know if the politician is governed by something broader that we say. Of course, it's like anti-corruption is basically what you can put it under.
Yeah,
But you talked initially, so I'll relate this back to what you said initially, right? So there are conceptual things that are proposed.
yeah,
Let's take, for example, tunnel road or elevated flyovers and things like that. This is a decision that the city needs to broadly make, and the politician says, since I have been elected, I can make this anyway. Future of the city and the alternatives for any particular project or things that are proposed for the city is a democratic decision that need to be made, and we have to participate in the process. And sometimes, while we say what we say, the political class does not need to take that into account. So they might just say, no, I just want to build this anyway because I have the mandate to do it, right? Do the judiciary step in at that point, saying we have not been provided alternatives? Can How do we, of course you can only count on the due process, and
yeah,
even after the due process, if they still make a decision, they make, tough luck, we have to live with it and maybe wait
yeah,
for somebody else who is your way to come and demolish that and
yeah,
build
yeah,
something else instead. uh, does the judiciary step in? Because at some point it might just be, we can't do anything.
yeah, yeah. I think we have to be mindful of that. We have to be cognizant of the limitations of a dispute resolution body. You know, unless there is a transgression of a laid down legal procedure or violation of fundamental rights, the courts really don't have mandate to step into anything that is contemplated. So which is why, who is doing the conceptualization, how are they going about it, do they have the all the people required in the room, have they, all of those. So which is why it becomes important for people to engage with building due process, making sure that the due process is in place, making sure that uh, there is an engagement on with the institutions, rather than jumping into then your case actually, even though, for example, a flyover, if there is no local mandate for due process in designing a flyover, right? Somebody who goes to the courts will be met with disappointment, because ultimately, if not there, sometime later, somebody will say there is no mandate for them to follow this procedure, due process, as you called it. It's important to engage with the development of a due process and the institutions in the due process before jumping off the handle to the constitutional courts. This is, of course, only for projects that are still in the ideation stage.
Hmm.
And maybe, Ejipura flyover is in the High Court. I think they did try the High Court route, and you could just see the sympathies from the judges. What there is no alternative to poor decision making within the law. you Somebody who is authorized to do something, does follow all the procedure, comes to a wrong conclusion, I don't think there is a legal
Yeah, they can't do
recourse to it.
anything much.
You have to just go back and say, how did we elect the person, how was that person appointed? Those are the questions,
Right.
larger questions, and which is why urban infrastructure and services is laying bare these larger governance and institutional mechanisms more than other areas. Is it is showing how much of a khichdi all of this has become. All right, everybody has a hand in it. Everybody is everything. There is a minister in charge, cabinet minister in charge, CM in charge. Then there's civil society. There are think tanks. There are executives. Everybody is a part of this complete. Each of them have the roles to play, but then still the outcome is not very palatable. So I think I would still think that there is a lot to learn. There has been a significant change in the mindset of people who are working on these problems, but there's still a lot to learn for all of us. I'm not particularly in the urban space, but as somebody who's watching the functioning of institutions closely, this is a fascinating area to see how these institutions are interacting with each other.
That brings me to the question of us normal citizens. I wanted to bring the political side out just to make sure of the point you said, is that we need to be careful about what are the ideas being presented and evaluate the stupidity of that and have a vision of our own which we broadly agree upon. even while we need not nitpick on these things. Where is the city going? What is it happening? So that the urban infrastructure gets built that way.
Yeah.
And it's very important to put the guardrails on what you should not do, like the famous quote of Jacobi, which is invert, right? What you don't want to happen, let us make sure of that. And then
Yeah.
inside that, we can build in. But the question in that was to look at the our propensity to go to the judiciary to seek recourse, whether it is personal or PIL, it is quite slow in nature. Obviously, because the courts have what they have. But instead of trying to sympathize, I'd like to ask, can it not be any better? Why does it take so long to get cases sorted out? Especially, I'm not just saying in the urban domain, but it just seems that that itself is a big deterrent for most people to say, if I go to the court, I waste a lot of my time and it doesn't yield the results, then why am I even doing this, right? How can justice be a deterrent even for small things? Because I'll just, like, for example, my dad fell down and had injuries, right? We went in and asked the hospital, you have to pay 5,000, you have to write in this notebook. And there itself they were, sir, do you know that if you do this, you're going to waste a lot of time going to the courts? And then even if you then go and do that and you talk to the police, they say, why don't you file that over there? But remember, you're going to file a lot of. I'll
Yeah.
come back to the cost of enforcement and this dissuading. But don't you think the delays, let's address the delays in courts. Are they
Yeah.
bad now? What is the situation?
Delays are definitely a problem. There is no getting away from that. A delay is actually a denying of immediate enforcement of anything, of your rights, of contractual rights, of fundamental rights. So it is, a delay is only a way of saying not now, right? Which means to say you don't have your right now, which is, I don't know. It's kind of seems like illogical. The situation has improved. In some case, in some courts and in some levels, it has improved. For certain types of cases, it has improved. But generally, most of what we are talking about are writ petitions,
Mhm.
and there is a lot of variation in the time taken for disposal of writ petitions. So it's not possible to make a sweeping statement, broad, overarching generalization. It has definitely improved, I would say, but still a lot to be done, because delay has cost implications. Delay has, life and livelihood implications. Somebody who has a shop on a footpath, he's been evicted, right? And there are rules for who can be evicted, who can't be evicted. How do you hold that? You've lost a shop for 3 months, if he's lucky, 3 months, right? What happens to him? So there are severe livelihood and life implications of delays, which need the judiciary needs to think through. Again, delays, some scholars have said, is a response to the larger, maybe get just admitting the case is a way of showing to the other side that there is something here. So that is sending a signal for them to just go slow or back off, or something like that. Or it could be a way of signaling that we are there, don't worry, right? Well, whether they actually dispose it off is the next one. But I think as a country, we have past the stage where just admission was sufficient for people to feel that something is happening. We now need to start immediately thinking about, talking about solutions for delay problems. Um, Access to justice is a broad topic. It means many things depending on where you are. But for a long period of time, it meant giving people knowledge of their rights and knowledge of recourses, legal recourses, which could be including filing of cases. But I think we have to expand the definition of access to justice to include speedy disposal of cases. Absolutely, delays are a problem that, whichever way you look at it, you can't think around it. You have to solve for it.
There is also this cost of enforcement debate that has recently perked up. There was this California Proposition 47, which said up to $1,000 we don't have the ability to, or we won't put some kind of a criminal case or some such thing, and it'll be a slap on the wrist kind of a thing, if at all. I have seen that unofficially in our country. So I have been at police stations where there are a couple of there were a couple of kids who came saying, I lost my cell phone, and the police officer just came out after solving a big domestic dispute which could have ended really badly, and you're saying, you tell me which one am I supposed to do? And he clearly discouraged him by, boss, it's just 10,000 rupees.
Mm.
We will spend more time chasing this, and the cost of our time, we might as well solve that murder issue that has happened. So
Yeah.
there is always this evaluation of the opportunity cost by the enforcers and even the executive. They start looking. So there is a classification of loss is that you are worse off than the other person, so it is okay. Is that an okay thing to do? Is that considered not providing justice? Is that a natural course of order? Are we supposed to accept it as it is?
Except what?
Where do you
Sorry,
say
if you can just be specific.
accept the ability to not chase this? So he clearly, the
Okay.
police
Okay.
police is clearly saying, don't file a case, just write it. If you find a bunch of, I've lost two bicycles, and this happened with me. And one
Mm.
time he said, sir, you just write in this thing if you find a cycle. And then he calls me up after 2 weeks and says, here, your cycle is here. I went and see. I said, where's my cycle? He said, look, there
Pick up
are
one of
that
them.
yours is black, right? So this is the black one. Why don't you pick that up? I said, no, but that's not my cycle. He said, no, but it's black. Why don't you just
Yeah.
take it? It's yours.
Yeah. Yeah.
We just found a bunch of it.
Seventy
And then
percent might catch.
70, the color is met, and so it's yours. So,
Correct.
and in many other cases, they are not even chasing this. I've had
Yeah.
even commercial people say, I've lost a bunch of things, but they don't chase. So this, all I'm saying is that okay? Is these kind of determinations, is that okay? Is that even okay for a society to say that? It has led to disasters in our country. It has not led to the disastrous consequences you see, but back in the US, you can see stores are shutting down because people are just walking in, stealing for $1,000 worth and going out of the door, right? But here it is happening. People steal cell phones knowing that the police won't come after them,
Yeah.
but if they do, they'll come and seize a bunch of cell phones and just, this is your cell phone, you can take it, it's 10,000 worth. How is this going? Is that even okay for in an urban area to
So,
say things like that?
so I think we have to differentiate between cost of enforcement and capacity for enforcement. We have to distinguish and differentiate between these two factors.
They're not
The
correlated, you think?
I'll come to that in just a bit. So the US example, which we have seen, is possibly a cost of enforcement, which is a very conscious policy decision, the effect of that. But in India, I think we're far away from that. It is a case of people saying, I don't have the capacity to solve for all types of cases. There is no conscious policy decision. It is arising out of helplessness or a lack of ability to prioritize cases, right? Now, the volume of the dispute, the money involved or the property involved is a consideration for in many courts, not just the US, right? Again, depends on what type of dispute. If it's a theft, right, it's different because it is a crime. It is different from damages. It is different from defrauding or false Nike being spelled differently and being sold off, right? So a theft is a serious social problem. It is a crime against the society, right? It is an offense against the society. It is not just an economic consequence. There is a social consequence. So I think we are not in the same anywhere close to the US situation that you talked about. Where we are actually is the is the situation is that the police and the courts don't have the bandwidth and the number of people and the tools, technological tools, everything else, to manage the inflow that should happen. Please remember that in India, this is from our access approaches to justice survey that Daksh carried out in 2017. We asked 45,000 people across the country, what do you have a justiciable dispute? Which means to say, is it an enforcement of a fundamental right or a legal problem? If you do have a justiciable problem, what do you do with it? Only 10% of the people who had a justiciable problem actually ended up in courts, right? So there are a very small percentage of people in this country who are actually able to even approach courts, and that itself we are unable to manage. So there's a huge capacity problem. There are ways in which it can be solved, which is one of course, is to appoint more people. But I don't think, I mean, as a mobility person, you will know for more traffic, you don't build bigger roads. You need better transport mechanisms. So the ways court deal with that is a separate topic altogether. But cost of enforcement has many, I think, dimensions to it. And what we have not considered is the indirect cost to the society of lack of enforcement of contracts, lack of enforcement of fundamental rights. How will we know? We will only know maybe after 15, 20 years what has meant, because the roads, we were not able to punish the government contractors properly. Or maybe we're already seeing the effects of that in the resort politics,
Mhm.
right? Uh, we will only know once somebody is dispassionately disaggregating and dissecting the political, socio-political behaviors. It is not an easy question, absolutely.
But what that also results in is what you said is a low trust kind of a country. We have been called that many times, and
Yeah,
anybody I go to say this is a low trust economy or low trust country and all of those
yeah,
kind of things. I don't see why we should be a low trust country in terms of contract enforcement or whatever it might be.
yeah,
We can have a separate discussion on that. But your thoughts on increasing trust, at least I- can I do I trust BBMP to do what they say it is? Like it's a simple thing. Like you talked about mobility, right? Where there is a road hump, there is no signboard saying there is a road hump. Where there is a signboard saying road hump, there is no road hump really. So simple things where there is supposed to be a traffic signal, it doesn't work. So you lose trust in the things that you are supposed to have people respect. So if the signboards stop becoming reliable, I stop believing them and I make my own judgment on what I should do at the signal, what I should do at a road hump, or where I should park and not. So that goes back to no parking, right? I mean, you don't enforce, you don't do anything. The cost of lawlessness is the lack of trust in our elected people, and that translates into business as well, right? If the laws are not enforced right, I don't trust small businesses, and I keep going after the big businesses, and hence the small business doesn't get enough customers to build trust. And there are a bunch of things. I just want you to reflect on
yeah.
this whole concept of, if you don't have good law enforcement at whatever levels, we are continuing to be a low trust country, no?
Yes, enforcement is possibly the second half, the consequence or an effect of low trust. You need enforcement because there is low trust. If
Hmm.
there was already trust, then you would not have need to have recourse, to take recourse to an enforcement mechanism. I think there is a flux that is happening because of increasing formalization of relationships and the economy side of things. There is, if you the even the businesses in the past seem to run so smoothly on word of mouth,
Mm.
right? But now even with contracts we are not able to enforce it. How do you handle this dichotomy or a no, contradiction, right? मैं आपको दो करोड़ बेच दूंगा कल.
Mm.
Money goes, I mean, I don't want to go into the specifics of it, but we all know what we're talking about.
Mm.
But on the other hand, you have a nicely drafted Queen's English signed by both sides on a stamp paper, which is worth nothing. I remember my father built a house in the early 80s, and he asked the contractor for an agreement, and the contractor said, "Do you want a house or an agreement?" Right? So low trust is a complex problem. We should not, I don't think we should look at it mainly legalistically. There are social aspects of it which needs to, it has definitely it has consequences. Nobody's denying that currently we don't trust as much. There is a erosion of trust, if not a breakdown, which maybe there are others which are building, which we don't yet have visibility on, if one could be optimistic. But if you want to take a contrary view, you could say the old trust, community trust, social trust, The neighborhood, we don't talk to our neighbors as much as we don't share with our neighbors as much as we used to 20 years back, right? 15 years back. So there is, I think, a large, to take a contract enforcement in the legalistic view, would possibly be reducing, oversimplifying the problem. There is a larger socio-economic force at play, which we need to unwrap before we draw some actionables. Maybe the actionables is just an insight and an awareness, and just being, yeah, this is what it is. That's all. I think it's a difficult question to jump into right away. But yes, there is no denying there is a lack, there is a erosion of trust. There is no denying that it is leading to pressure on legal institutions. The why and the how, what next is something that needs a larger discussion for sure.
True, but I just to press that one more time. I also believe that there is a lot more non-trustworthy action because the disincentives don't exist. Because
Yes,
awareness is something
very
I have
much.
believed in, but I've seen people telling me that
The
unless there is
stick
a
needs to
monetary
be wielded
disincentive,
more.
yeah, if the
Absolutely, it's
stick
very
is not there,
simple.
the carrots alone are not working,
Not sufficient.
right? The bad
Absolutely.
actor is able to get away,
Yes, yes.
leaving so many people behind on so many things, and then you start doubting everybody else in the same space, whether it is
Correct,
a
correct,
startup
correct.
or a established player who goes to another country
Yeah,
after swindling billions. This cannot,
yes.
and it happens with, the reason I'm doing this is as a normal citizen.
See, if I may just, so the examples that you gave are high-end economic crimes, high-end
Hmm,
political actions. But so there, those are just consequences of the day-to-day chipping away of
exactly,
norms, right? So those have resulted in people saying, the tipping point. We are only seeing the tipping points. We are not seeing
correct.
the day-to-day things that are enabling that those tipping points.
And that precisely was my point, is that we say these transaction costs at the lowest level is I don't have enough police to investigate crimes. Why not? Because hiring them is costly, not just in time but also in money. I don't have both of those. And like you said, you can't throw supply
Yeah.
infinitely, but there has to be enough of it to not have,
Yes. There is a critical mass.
right? So if you don't chip away at those problems, you're going to have these high end things, very visible things come up as
Yeah.
well, because it's okay to do this small scale, little by little I grow into a big scale defrauder,
Yeah.
right? How, just your thoughts on this finally, as to where do you see this going from a judicial perspective? Are you happy with the way it is right now, and say it is a complex social problem, there are too many things, and the legal system has this thing that they can do? And how does the citizen, again coming back to your first, how does the citizen know where is the city located today in its arc of time and maturity? How do I determine that, and how do we figure out what are our recourses?
Both are very interesting questions, and I may just possibly come out of my comfort zone and possibly say, in the medium term, I'm optimistic about the way judiciary will evolve.
Hmm.
Um, Mainly because there is a lag. I always think of the judiciary as being very downstream. It has a lot of signaling effect. It has a lot
Mm.
of effect on the entire larger social, economic, political system, but it is very downstream. And
Mhm.
because we are seeing a lot of, we have seen the last 25, 30 years, so many changes in other parts of the economy, in the society, it's going to be very difficult for the judiciary to not be impacted by it, to stay away from being open to it. There are other reasons for it to not be impacted. But I'm fairly optimistic about the way judiciary is going to be responsive to the needs of the citizens in the medium term. Um, I'm unfortunately not so optimistic about the state of the cities, the urban space. Maybe there is a space for creative destruction. You
Mhm.
have to let some cities die. You may have to
Mhm.
build new cities. Uh, I thought the smart cities was a good idea because it picked a lot of tier two cities. You can't completely uproot and build new cities, but there doesn't seem to be any thinking through of newer cities. completely afresh, which will take away the pressure from the other top cities. Unless those other things happen, um, I don't see such a bright scenario for the urban landscape in the next 10 years.
I want just to switch it a little more positive in saying how do we look at the demand management, because you can increase the supply of courts capacity and other things, but demand management might mean, like you said, is taking away some of this burden and looking at
Yeah,
alternative way of remedying these kind of things. What support structures can be found on the outside which doesn't need you to what can you imagine in the urban space that can solve the political and the executive problem? Are there conversations that can be done? Are there convenings that can help? Are there committees that can as an ombudsman of sorts? Do you see civil society in that? How can you reimagine that space outside of the court on the demand side? Not bring everything, every fall need not come to the court. Can we have a more reliable?
that's exactly what we started our conversation with. That the engagement with the executive and the political needs to be more. They need to provide for, and possibly the court should push back and say, "Have you exhausted those remedies? Maybe there is a law that needs to come in place for damages that will be awarded to citizens who suffer from bad footpath or bad roads." So, in terms of there are certain rights to for which it is only the courts that should be responsible for enforcing, finding, upholding, etc. So, it's the fundamental rights, right? Those can't be touched, should not be touched. Um, but your grievance redressal mechanisms can be much stronger.
Mm.
Your representation and engagement with the policymakers can be much stronger. Those are the ways in which you can diffuse and reduce the dependency on courts for making your cities much better. I don't think there's any other way. You could have an app, you could have a platform. Again, these are various ways in which you improve engagement. The idea stays that there is somebody responding to somebody asking. The somebody asking was earlier letters to the editor in the last 20 years. Now it's gone to social media posts. Now you have email IDs and Twitter handles to tag. But there is somebody who needs to say, this is important, you have to respond to this. That does not go away. That should not go away. That should be even only be strengthened.
I guess that kind of summarizes where we are. There is no other solution than getting better people at the helm who really care about solving problems, who really look at this complex system and say, let's help you break it down. And there is also this whole thing about how do we get people to know these things? Of course, we have these conversations, but I want to take a legal recourse. Have I checked off the list of the other things that I have done? I think there is space for people in the civil society to put that together and put
Absolutely.
guidance on more
Correct.
visibly, right?
Absolutely. There is, I mean, the educational tools available for citizens to make them aware of their options. Should you go to city civil court? Should you go to high court? Should you go to consumer court? Is there a tribunal specifically? Right.
Hmm.
That educational material definitely should be improved. There is a big case to be made for that.
Yeah, it may at least even be as simple as an infographic of an if-then flow
Correct.
chart, which says,
Correct.
if you do this, this is what it is, and then in the
Correct.
end, like if you lost a cell phone, forget about it, go back home. I mean, it's
It
just
happened just last week. We were just discussing last week. Somebody
uh,
did have a problem with a white washing machine. Who somebody came and posed themselves as authorized dealers and ran away with the PCB. And the lawyers said, "Don't even bother."
write it off.
Right? You know?
Write off all the small frauds. In the end, you will run out a
You'll be
bill of
spending money on me. You can, with that money you spend on me, you can just buy another washing machine.
another washing. This is what I was talking about, the cost of enforcement thing, right?
Yes.
Slowly, if that inflation on the cost happens, today it is 20,000 rupees, tomorrow it might be 50,000 rupees, and then 1 lakh. And
Yeah.
then the poor are saying, I mean, you had a washing machine, you could afford one and you lost it. But what
Correct.
about my whatever else in my house? Somebody just took it away. It could be
Yes.
a life savings of my vehicle, for example, right?
Yes.
Somebody stole the battery in my vehicle.
Yeah.
The police are not even equipped to chase batteries.
Correct.
How many
Correct.
batteries am I supposed to chase?
Yeah.
All your
Yeah.
vehicles are losing batteries anyway. The cost of trust there and the cost of theft. Anyway, so it's been an interesting conversation, Surya. I
Thank you.
mean, thanks for spending time and talking about this. I'm a little bit wiser, but I still need an infographic or some such thing to navigate my
We
life.
will work on it.
Let's say maybe we should bring something out and put it in. But thanks very much for this thing, for coming on the show. And I call out to everyone to like, subscribe, and share these videos so we can have more interesting guests like Surya come on the show and talk to you. See you all next week. Bye bye.
Thank you.